We now are the dominant player in professional sports scheduling. We have every major sports league as our customer. Later this year, we're launching facial scans for comparison
Right.
to sexual predator databases. Right. There's been some incidences, some very unpleasant ones at youth events. People buy tickets to the events. They have no idea who these people are. And it turns out some of them should not have legally been there, given that they're on a sex offender database. If I go to my child's school, I have to get buzzed into like this man cage, if you will, this plastic bulletproof container. They take my ID, they find out why I'm there, they take my picture, they keep it under control until they know everything about me, and then I have access to the school. But at that same school, if I'm going to a sporting event after hours, it's here's your $5 ticket, come right in. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, does it?
What does a company that already handles scheduling for the NBA, MLB, and La Liga do after raising a 40 million Series A round? That's exactly what we unpack in today's conversation with John Stewart, CEO and co-founder of FastBreak AI. FastBreak powers scheduling for over 50 leagues globally, turning something as simple as scheduling into a strategic asset that drives revenue, impacts cost, especially travel, and boosts fan engagement. Now, with fresh capital, the company is doubling down, not just on pro leagues, but on a bigger opportunity in youth and amateur sports. In this episode, we get into why scheduling is one of the hardest problems in sport, what it takes to build infrastructure that entire leagues depend on, and how you scale a business built on one specific solution into something much broader. Here's my conversation with John Stewart, CEO and co-founder of FastBreak AI. John, a fast break came on everybody's radar towards the end of last year after you made a pretty major announcement of a funding round. But I know that the company's been operating for quite a while in a very interesting segment of the sports tech industry. I want you to tell us a little bit about the origin story of the company and, let's say, your own as you set it up.
Sure, thanks. So FastBreak AI, we've been around since July of 2022. It was co-founded by myself, Dr. Chris Grower, Dr. Tim Carnes. They're sort of the science behind the business. A bit of a continuation from some of the work that they did at my prior company. My prior company was called Map Anything. We were a field sales, field service, route and schedule optimization company. And those two individuals worked for me there. And we built the routing and scheduling engine that was sort of revolutionary, super fast, super capable. At the time, we sold that company to Salesforce May of 2019. I waited out for a couple of years for the non-compete. And then in July 7th, 2022, we started this company. Because of the day and age of AI and crypto, compute had changed, and we were able to sort of lean into a whole new approaches around doing these very, very complex multivariable optimization problems specifically for scheduling. Chris and Tim had a background in scheduling because prior to Map Anything, where I recruited them out of was a project where they had been working on the in-house system for the NBA. And so we knew there was an opportunity to actually build a platform for professional league sports scheduling because none existed. Everything was either using off-the-shelf software or bespoke systems built by a league that were, honestly, those it may be okay for that particular league, but truthfully, the NBA is best at running a professional basketball league. So really, we've never been able to keep up with all the parameters in the constantly shifting landscape. So we knew there was an opportunity there. And so we focused on professional sports as our entryway into sports in general. So as we sit today, we have three lines of business: a professional business, a amateur business, and a brand business that all sort of work together. But our entry point was at the highest level through the launch of the technology and acquisition of a couple of consultants in the space, which we added their know-how and capability to our engine. We now are the dominant player in professional sports scheduling. We have every major sports league as our customer, except for EPL, IPL, and the Bundesliga. But besides that, we have all the major players. And we've leveraged that same technology down market as we've attacked the youth sports space in the United States, which is a $70 billion TAM.
You mentioned acquiring a couple of consultants, and I want to take a minute over there because always find it fascinating with these kind of stories that what you'd consider like this really important function, like scheduling. And I know the little bit of the origin story of there was maybe one guy who used to do it for the NFL back in the day, and similar stories like there was one person who had the formula in his own head before, let's say, proper organized systems were put in place. There's a similar kind of off-brand disconnected story, but for the MLB, but the soil that gets rubbed on the balls, on baseballs, like, and it comes from one particular farm in one particular place. And I think maybe you can see a thread with this is that I find it interesting how these which is such an important function. Let's say the ball is a centerpiece, as important centerpiece in baseball, of course, but it comes from just this one person, this one thing. And it sounds like the scheduling story, at least the basic information that I have, kind of starts with that before it becomes this, as you mentioned, a highly complex structure, and especially with so many games and so many competitions, to get those schedules right is so complicated. Was that your experience of it? That, as you mentioned, those consultants, it was this one guy, and suddenly it's a lot bigger than this one person can manage.
Well, yeah, and actually, that is true that it's mostly been one consultant. So you look at Major League Baseball, there's a well-known 30 for 30 ESPN piece on the
Yep.
Stevensons, right? And it was a family. And then when interleague play came along, it was no longer possible for their approach. And then it became a series of different consulting groups who worked on the schedule. And that was a huge area, or has been a huge area of risk for these professional sports leagues. Well, great. What if that one person gets hit by a bus tomorrow? All of a sudden, all the domain knowledge sort of goes out the window. And one of the reasons we acquired the consultants was their know-how for those particular problems. And, with their help, first of all, I'm happy to say in both cases for the two companies we acquired, Barcelogics and Optimal Planning, all the principles for those companies have stayed on and still work here. So this area of sports scheduling is pretty niche. There's probably like 12 or 13 people in the whole world who know what they're doing with this stuff. And, 9 of them work for us. Right. So it's super, super nichey. And, we've taken that know-how and we've incorporated it into our proprietary, optimization and scheduling engine for sports, all that knowledge, how these problems are set up. And that's sort of given us the unique advantage that we now have in this area.
Sorry, I don't want to. I don't want to ask you to give away the secret sauce here or anything, but at least give
Don't
us an
worry about
insight. I know you. I know you wouldn't, John. There's no risk of that happening. But I want you to give our listeners a little bit of an insight on what is really such a complication to this scheduling thing that only 12 people in the world, as you mentioned, are specialized and really have the know-how to do it. Hey, listen, we've all set up a game, we've all set up a vacation or planned certain things, and you logically think that can't be that hard, but it clearly is. Because, and as your company is established and there's a well-established company dealing with the leagues, with the major organizations, what is the real complication here, and what is the secret sauce at a very
Well,
high level that you bring to the table?
tell you what, let's talk about why and how these are so complicated at the highest level. So I'm going to talk about my good friends at the NBA for a minute. You think about that schedule and you're like, well, how hard could it be put together? I mean, the matchups at least are a bit of a formula, just like the matchups are a formula in the NFL. Well, let's think about that for a second. You've got 30 teams and 30 sets of arena availabilities, right? So that's first and foremost. And look, there's no one NBA game that's more important than a Taylor Swift concert, right? So those things are years out in the scheduling. So first you have to collect up all the arena availability from all the different teams. Then you've got to deal with your, contractual entitlements, right? So if ESPN and Amazon and NBC are all paying billions of dollars, which they are, the NBA now has a $7.7 billion media rights deal, which is amazing. Well, they're all going to want a few things. They're all going to want a certain number of Laker games, a certain number of Warriors games, a certain number of Celtic games. If a superstar like Kevin Durant goes to Houston, they're going to want a few Houston games. And when and where they want those games is going to be a part of the schedule. And then you have, collective bargaining rules, right? Minimization of 4 and 5s and 7 and 13s, and NBA players don't play back to backs if it's over 1,200 miles. So you have to account for that, the travel piece of it. So you start adding all these things together, in the number of times they can play in a certain number of days. And then you have competitive balance and fairness rules. You start thinking about all the competing factors that go into it. And you can start seeing why these are combinatorial math problems. They exponentially grow the more parameters or rules you put in place. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rules that go into making even, an NBA schedule. And the same is true of the SEC and the Big Ten and the NFL, you name it. So they all have their own particular issues they have to deal with. And really the trick is having a system like we have that makes it easy for a business user to define those rules, which has typically been complex math equations, if you will, and B, an engine that's both fast enough and capable enough to balance all those parameters as it searches the infinite solution space for a potential schedule. My co-founder Chris likes to say there's more potential schedules than there are atoms in the sun. in the solution space when you get to one of these complex problems. And the trick of it is we're turning a solution in a relatively fast period of time. And we are the fastest in the world at these problems by many, many factors with all these competing parameters to come up with something that is a playable schedule.
And let's say in my head, it's almost like the complexity is only increasing. Add international games, right? Add where you're covering multiple continents. Add the fragmentation of broadcasting, right? So the multiple operators who are all trying to compete for slots. Add, as you said, more Taylor Swift concerts and more forms of entertainment that are competing. So it feels like it's a problem that is only getting more and more complicated. Is that fair?
That is very fair. And especially with the media partners, you go back 10 years and your media distribution was CBS, ABC, NBC. And then ESPN came along, but that was a form of ABC. Now every major tech platform is competing for, and the leagues are smart. They're selling to more and more partners as they should. Their job is to increase revenue for their stakeholders, the players, the owners, the fans. That balance just gets that much more complicated every single year, it seems.
Absolutely. And I think that that's the one thing about almost about the scheduling problem that is almost unsaid. It was until I saw the funding news and let's say you're like, okay, wow, that's a serious round and that's a company that's looking to build at serious scale without, I don't know, too much competition in the market as well. I don't see it seems like there's a pretty big gap to a second place. I don't know if there's a major operator in there. And then you
There is no
understand that
second place.
exactly, right?
There's a consultant or two that still have a league or two, but there really is no second place for us.
Yeah, and that's what we have seen. I wanted glad that you're confirming our data as well. So it's like it's a winner take all, but like this is such a crucial piece that you're doing for the world then, right? You're operating for every major league across the world. Is there a league or any particular case? I just want to take a use case kind of approach. Is there one that stands out that is a bit more complicated? Like, for example, I don't know, the MLB, just because they have so many games versus some of the other leagues, or something which is broadcast in multiple locations? Is there something which adds a particular league that adds a higher level of complexity?
Probably NBA is right up there in terms of complexity. National Rugby League, believe it or not, because of their rest patterns, really, really complex, mathematically speaking. In terms of the problem, to find a solution for it. There's this idea of what we call a day-based league versus a round-based league. Round-based leagues are sort of interesting. They have what we call interlocking schedules. In other words, I can't make a move without changing 30% of the overall schedule. So any change is hugely impactful, which means you have to resolve the problem. There's a day-based league, for example, NBA or NHL, I can move one particular game if I've got a really good schedule without messing up the rest of it. That's just not possible with an interlock schedule like NRL or the NFL. Like one move changes 30% of the schedule, which means it's basically a resolve every time. So those have their own complications in them. But I mean, truthfully, they're all hard, right? You think of, some of the college conferences, which now have, like, for example, the ACC, which now has what was used to be in the Pac-10 as part of the ACC. So travel complications are now part of college scheduling, right? It's getting only more difficult as
And then FIFA wants to launch another new tournament in the summer or something like that, and then everybody's schedules go haywire. It's such a fascinating. Sorry, go ahead.
and especially with soccer too, where you've got these overlapping sort of,
Yeah.
European soccer, where a big problem with our European soccer customers is, well, I also have sort of those, the European, what is it, Champions Cup or Champions League, whatever they call it, that they also have to, account for as well, right? So while still trying to have fair and competitively balanced schedules inside their league play, that's a big concern for them. And that's one of the things that, we're able to help them with.
I can tell you a small personal story of how scheduling affects me as a fan, of course, in many ways, but I, as a fantasy sports player, right? So I play the Fantasy Premier League avidly every year. I usually win my leagues, so I'm
All
proud of
right.
that.
Excellent.
But
Good.
it's really fun. It's really fun to see like the speculation about, hey, if this team wins that game in that cup, and then this match might get moved into that week or that week, like it might move from game week 26 to game week 33, and how does that impact? It's so fascinating. Anyway, I mean, we could go on and on down this rabbit hole. I want to take a step back actually and get your perspective as an exited founder. I mean, you mentioned the company that you sold out to Salesforce, a couple of years of non-compete, a little bit of earnout as well, I'm sure. What lens did you take looking into the sports industry? Because you didn't come into the sports industry, right? You came in with this solution. Is that right? How do you view the sports tech market in the time that you spent in it? Before we continue, a quick word from us at Sports Tech X. If you're building, investing, or operating in sports tech, you need to know what's moving in the global ecosystem before anyone else does. Sports Tech X's Intelligence Hub gives you that edge. Over 8,000 companies, investors, events, and programs all in one place. Sign up for free. That's intelligence.sportstechx.com. And be sure to check out the show notes of this episode for a little surprise waiting for you. Now, back to the episode.
Well, it's highly fragmented. And that was actually one of the things. So I'm a parent first. I've got 5 boys, all play travel sports or are still playing sports with my 2 younger. And, I lived sort of the nightmare that is sports technology for the youth marketplace, where it's 25 different apps. I'm being tongue in cheek and exaggerating, of course, but and none of them are all that great. And, you have to go to a whole bunch of different places to do the same thing. And so I recognize that there's an opportunity for consolidation there, just sort of putting the business sort of lens on it. Uh, but look, if you're going to attack that marketplace, you know, a lot of times sports tech gets captured in the niche that they're in and at that lower level because we had ability to deliver something of value to professional sports leagues. And we had the opportunity to enter at the top and work our way down versus the bottom, work our way up. So from our perspective, if you look at the original business plan for Fast Break, a lot of people think we've pivoted towards youth. It was never a pivot. It was always intentional. It was part of the plan. But you had to establish, our credentials and the dominance, if you will, at professional sports scheduling, then to take that down market to say, hey, we're now going to apply this to youth leagues, youth tournaments, and to give us sort of the anchor, if you will, to attack that marketplace the same way you would attacking it from an enterprise software standpoint. Enterprise software, if you look at it, what they do, they establish a marketplace and then they start monetizing everything in the marketplace, or they bring solutions, right? Microsoft's marketplace is the operating system. They'll sell you productivity in the form of Office. They'll sell you email in the form of Outlook. They'll sell you collaboration in the form of Teams, development in the form of GitHub. And it's the same sort of philosophy. Our anchor, our unique piece of IP is the scheduling problem, which is really, really hard, just as hard at youth as it is professionally. And so around that anchor, we've built our marketplace of registration, payments, travel, ticketing, sponsorship. And so that's sort of the lens I looked at it as, the opportunity to say, look, no one else is doing it this way. We have unique capability around the scheduling. Let's leverage that into a marketplace play in youth.
Land and expand, right? I think sports is the industry for it. Sports is the industry for it, and it's something that we see a lot, like from our portfolio companies at Match Ventures or even at Playmakers, our founders network. When we chat with our founders, is that everybody's quite okay with like low ACVs, like low contract values to start, and because they know that if you can get in, then the opportunities with that. Especially if let's say you're on the B2B side of sports, B2C is a completely different animal. But on the B2B side, if you can get in, getting that first contract and getting that first implementation can be a huge challenge. But once you're there, then, especially as the sports industry grows, you can take your pick. Like you can really, if you're a good company, hard execution, you can really grow. And sounds like that's what your strategy is as well.
I agree. Look, when we broke the marketplace down years ago, and this slide hasn't changed, I see 31 opportunities of where we can drive revenue for our customers or reduce costs. That's 31 solutions that can be wrapped into the marketplace.
Only 31, John. Sounds like such a small number.
As of this year, we have solutions for 8 of them, right?
Okay,
so that
wow.
gives us, as we continue to add customers, we can continue to bring other solutions, which ultimately, look, it's going to reduce costs for our operators at the youth level. It'll give them the ability to stay competitive and keep prices low so that people don't get priced out of participation in youth sports, which is a challenge in the industry right now. And so we see that as the opportunity.
And that's a super fair statement. Again, goes to the size of the fundraiser, or obviously the scale of your ambition, because it speaks to, hey, what's possible and what you can really do in this industry, especially if you've got such a strong anchor. Clearly, you're not going anywhere because there is no competition in that space. Then there is a lot that you guys can do. All right, John, taking a lens of looking forward, what's coming up for Fast Break? What are you guys lined up for the next 12, 18 months? Is there number 9 and 10 coming out of those opportunities or something else?
There is. So 2 big areas of focus for us. There's 2 real interesting things which don't sound like they make sense at all on the surface. I don't mind sharing them because honestly, we're doing them anyway. And it's keep up with us if you can, right? From a competitive standpoint. Background checks integrated into the platforms. This is a big thing with volunteers, with coaches, but also for our ticketing platform.
So, background checks for attendees or only for like operational staff on the
Background checks for attendees and no, sorry, for operational staff and
right.
participants in the program. But for ticketing later this year, we're launching facial scans for comparison
Right.
to sexual predator databases. Right. Look, there's been some incidences, some very unpleasant ones at youth events. People buy tickets to the events. They have no idea who these people are. And it turns out some of them should not have legally been there, given that they're on a sex offender database. Right. So this is an area of risk. Same thing with schools, right? I find it amusing that, or not amusing, but I find it ironic that in the United States, if I go to my child's school, I have to get buzzed into like this man cage, if you will, this plastic bulletproof container. They take my ID, they find out why I'm there, they take my picture, they keep it under control until they know everything about me, and then I have access to the school. But at that same school, if I'm going to a sporting event after hours, it's here's your $5 ticket, come right in. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, does it? So we see an opportunity for our electronic ticketing platform to incorporate this. Plus, at the bigger operators, again, as I said, there's been some instances, and not just for people on a database, but also for parents that have misbehaved very badly and attacked kids that they want to restrict access. Your face is unique, and that's an opportunity that we see. We'll be the only platform on the planet, especially at this level, to incorporate that into youth ticketing. We think that'll springboard us into other opportunities. And then obviously the background checks, we launch our club product this year, and volunteers, coaches, I think we're introducing this concept of continuous background checks. Background checks like sort of like a credit check. It's what you've done in the past at that point. The challenge, of course, is if there's a coach driving the team bus and he cleared his background check, great. But what if he got arrested for DWI last weekend and he's still the guy driving your bus? Sort of an issue, right? And that's the idea behind it. If you're going to be involved with kids, so that's one area. And the other area we're working on is what we call wallet and reward programs. We're going to be introducing our own wallet and payment infrastructure, merchant bank infrastructure, so that we can offer to clubs and teams and even operators basically treasury services. But what this leads into is this idea of white label reward programs. So if you're a parent spending with an operator, we can start rebating you back some of your spend. So then you can use that for future spend in the ecosystem. And that creates this cycle where it lowers your overall costs as well.
Makes sense. It sounds like you're in a lot of the investments you're looking forward is around youth sports.
Yes, true.
And that's makes sense, tracks overall with some of the broader trends that we're seeing in the sports tech industry. I want to put you on the hotspot for a second and talk about what do you see as the big trend coming out of 26 and let's say 12, 18 months, 27 as well in the industry at large? Talk about, let's say, from your B2B hat on, from broadcasting leagues, whichever perspective you want to take.
Well, I mean, I think the story's a little bit of the same for both professional and youth leagues and even college, which is the private equity money, what used to be said is coming, is now here, and it's only going to accelerate. This has been identified as an asset class at multiple levels. And so you see mass amounts of capital, and I would say now smart capital coming into the space. And the same is true of the youth industry. You can see the roll up of operators and programs. So I don't think it's any secret that there's going to be more and more investment in that space by private equity. I see that as a trend. Affordability, which is a word all over American politics right now, is also coming to youth sports as well, which is to say, how do you make it more and more affordable and keep the access open for those participating in youth sports? This is a concern and it's something that we're keeping an eye on. And I think some of the technology we're developing and some of the partnership channels we're opening up is going to help us participate in a solution to what eventually will be, a crisis of affordability at the youth sport level as well. I think that's probably going to be a theme in 2026 going into 2027 as well.
That's an
Um,
interesting angle. Sorry, go ahead.
those are sort of the two. I think those are probably the two big themes, and of course, the third one is AI everywhere for everybody, and that's changing the way the consumer interacts and behaves with technology. You could make a case that the user experience of the future for every application is just a prompt, and at least for the consumer, probably a voice prompt at that. And I think you'll see that accelerate this year in sports tech also.
That's
We're
fair.
we're certainly leaning into that. I will
Yeah,
tell you.
yeah. I think anybody who's not is, I don't think there's anybody who's not. You kind of have to be. And also, how does that impact your cost projections? You should be reducing your costs ideally and maybe reducing your funding asks and stuff. So I think the AI one is a fair one. The affordability on youth sports is an interesting comment. I haven't heard too much of a conversation around that. So we'll keep an eye out for that one. And the last one, you mentioned PE. Take a not a dig, but it's a comment on my fellow VCPE friends. Just because you have money doesn't mean it's smart money. I don't think anybody's going to punch me in the face for that one. It's one of those but it is a super fair statement. There is
But
much
look,
more qualified capital coming into the sports
I was
market.
going to say this is true, and there was a lot of money flooded into space the last 5 or 6 years. The difference now is the type of money that's coming in. Look, Harris Blitzer is really smart money, and they've put a lot in. They're continuing to invest, right? You see the larger firms now sort of investing in the space, and putting money into theirs. The more traditional private equity, I would say, that traditionally had not put money in the space. I think that's now here and is going to accelerate.
Absolutely. And there's something that we track on our channels. If you anybody who's a regular reader of our newsletter knows, I think it's barely 6 weeks or 7 weeks into the new year. I think we've announced $3 billion plus funds or something of
Yes.
that sort around the sports tech space. And there are multiple others. So yeah, there's just more and more capital flooding into it. It's a really interesting, exciting time to be working in the industry. John, thank you so much for your time. Chatting with us, chatting with our audience. Really appreciate it. For anybody who wants to get in touch with you, maybe LinkedIn or your email is a good spot too.
Yep, absolutely. John at
We'll put
FastBreak.ai.
fantastic. We'll put that in the show notes. Last question before I let you go. I like to believe we're all sports fans first. So I always want to know what has been your favorite sporting moment.
My favorite sporting moment, let's see. I probably would go by, I would have to say probably by sport. I mean, there was a time before I moved to Charlotte, I was a huge Colts fan. So, the AFC Championship where Manning finally beat Brady, that was a great sort of sports moment. Basketball, I'm a big fan of NBA basketball. Unfortunately, I've been a Hornets season ticket holder for about 8 years, and that hasn't been great. But this is the year. I think the team has finally put it all together, and I think you'll actually see my Hornets make the playoffs this year, which would be amazing. But I love Dream Team 1 on the Olympics back in the 90s when they first allowed professionals to play basketball with the Olympic athletes. I think that was great. I don't know. There's probably, I think you would probably have to put it into the context year to year, right? I would tell you from a sports stand, but I'm a big fan of probably all of it. And, if boiling down to one moment, I'm not sure that's possible because that's what's
That
great about sports. It's how you feel in the moment, but
yeah.
more importantly, like who you're watching it with and the energy sort of you feel as it goes.
Context
Uh,
is so important. And in fact, it's funny that you mentioned the dream team and then the Hornets just before that. All it took was Jordan finally selling out, and the Charlotte is half decent again, right? That's all we needed.
it was strange that Michael was so competitive on the court.
Yeah.
It always struck me strange that it didn't feel like he was trying that hard as an owner. So yeah, new ownership, Rick and Dan and Gabe are doing a great job with the Hornets, and my hat's off to them. And I've, obviously been a loyal season ticket holder for a while. So, I love what they've done with the team, and I think it's great what's going on right now with them.
Fantastic. Best of luck with a deep playoff run. I don't know how deep you can expect it to go, but second round, let's say second round, I think it'd be a
There you
win.
go. I would be happy with the progress in the second round because look, we have a great team that's mostly younger players, right? We've got a lot of
Right.
rookies, a lot of second and third year players. We have the opportunity to be good for a long time. So I'm excited about that.
Fantastic, John. Best of luck with it. Thank you once again for the time.
Thank you.
All right, guys, that's a wrap for another episode, another fascinating conversation in the books. Stay tuned next week for another one. Cheers. See you then. That's a wrap on this episode of the Sports Tech AllStars Podcast. If this conversation gave you something, a new angle, a name to follow, a deal to think about, please share it with someone in your network who needs to hear it. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, a quick rating takes a few seconds and helps more people find the show. If you're not on our weekly newsletter yet, fix that at newsletter.sportstechx.com to join 20,000 other sports business leaders. For deeper intel on sports innovation, investment, and where capital is moving in sports, head to sportstechx.com or follow us on socials, on our LinkedIn. Subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts so that the next conversation finds you. See you in the next one.